Hi everyone, today our guest is Viola von Cramon. Hi Viola.
Hi Emin.
Viola is member of European Parliament and member of the Committee for Foreign Affairs in the European Parliament. And I also have to say that Viola was member of German Bundestag in 2009-2013 and was vice chairwoman of South Caucasus group in Bundestag.
Correct, that's right.
Viola, welcome in our new show. I wanted to start with Germany because it's interesting. We have been observing how Greens have, become more and more popular in Germany, and in the last weeks especially. So it's basically is second strongest political force in Germany. Could you tell us what does it mean for? Do you expect actually? I think it will be interesting for our audience to understand the German politics, like where Greens are standing today in German politics. How realistic are your chances? What are your plans? Coming to power or forming coalition? Where are the Greens now in German politics?
Thanks a lot for having me. It's a great pleasure talking to you in this format. It's definitely a useful thing to explain a little bit what might be behind some of the, let's say, Greens' more principle-based concepts of foreign policy. And so it is important to say that without exaggerating, I think that a good part of the German population would like to see us as part of the coalition. I think it's much too early to say whether we could become the biggest force, but nevertheless, of course, there's a good trend which shows that we gain more and more support within Germany, but also on the, let's say, state level. You have probably seen that Winfried Kretschmann had a landslide victory recently in the election in March, which was not surprising because he has shown and proved that they really had a solid way of governing the country, a very successful country in terms of economy, in terms of climate change, in terms of agriculture and many other subjects. So we Greens have not just demanding or have been demanding things, but also delivering things. People are more or less satisfied with our way, how we're going to deal with things. And that's important to say before we start with, let's say, the more foreign policy concept. When it comes to foreign policy, I think if you look at the Greens, we just had an internal meeting because our, as we say, the program for the upcoming federal elections needs to be redrafted. There are a lot of amendments in the pipeline. And I think there's still, let's say, a little bit of a struggle between more leftist, fundamentalist one, and more, let's say, the realpolitiker, so the people who would like to govern and maybe a little bit more pragmatist, but nevertheless principle-based. So when it comes to, let's say, the situation in South Caucasus or the post-Soviet sphere, I think it is mainly up to us to have a coherent approach towards each and every country. Not to say, well, we are anti that, or we are anti this, or we are anti Putin, but rather to say and to have clear criteria after which we would define our policy.
Let's go back for a second to, again, like as German politics, but that is connected now to Azerbaijan. In recent weeks, I have seen a lot of coverage of a lot of scandals, political scandals here in Germany, reported in German media about CDU-CSU politicians involved in corruption and various scandals like this, but also in connection with Azerbaijan. And I've never seen so much coverage about Azerbaijan, and I know German, and I've lived in Germany and follow all German media for many, many years. I have never seen so much mentioning of Azerbaijan, not just in media, but also in headlines. So it wasn't just, our friend Gerald Knaus, he was, for example, for years he was talking about his reports, uncovering corruption and lobbyism. But it was only now that we could see Gerald in, Markus Land's show, so Spiegel. So it was everywhere in headlines, all media. And I had a feeling, and this is the question, so I would like you, if you could explain us what's happening, what is this buzz about? I mean, where is it coming from? Is this some, internal German political struggle? Or was it coming from political forces, or was it just a series of investigations that, German media planned? That's one question. So to explain what's happening, I think it will be interesting to hear that. And also the second question I have in this connection is, I had a feeling that after what we have seen in German media, it will be quite difficult for anyone who wants to do some project, that is connected to Azerbaijan, or to say something positive about Azerbaijan, not to be put in a box of, or to have a stigma of, oh, maybe this person has some other, interests, or bribed or corrupted and so on. How to distinguish then between these kind of genuine and good projects, or, authentic projects, and these corrupt and illegal lobbying activities. So what would you say about this?
Oh, there are many, many layers in your questions, or in your complex of questions.
Two questions.
Yes. Yeah. Let me start from why did it pop up now? Gerald Knaus' analysis or study, I think, was published in 2012 or even 11. That was still when you were in jail, or just right after this. And we were really trying to fight hard in the Council of Europe, in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where Gerald originally has published this. And even at that time, really tried to focus on the problem of having an autocrat, as Aliyev is, buying votes in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, of the European Council, to avoid, let's say, at that time, the stigma of having political prisoners. The whole idea of Christoph Stresser, he was the special envoy for political prisoners on the territory of the Council of Europe, was to get free access to each and every country. But there was one country which had never given access, and that was Azerbaijan. And on the other hand, they have bought already at that time Axel Fischer, Karin Strenz, and many others for their advantage. And that in 2012, 11 and 11 or 13, it was not having any consequences, any impact on the political decision. It actually disappointed me quite a lot. And now what you have asked me concerning the conservative group in the Bundestag, I think they're having a real internal problem, and they've finally found out it is not just a smaller scandal about mask demand and supply, but there are many of their own members in the political group who obviously were either lobbying for North Macedonia, for Azerbaijan, for Kazakhstan, for other, figures. So it is, in your perspective, of course, very obvious, let's say, a bias towards Azerbaijan. But in a broader sense, I think it was shown, or it was proved that the CDU-CSU, the conservatives, they have a problem with what they have called then black filth, so black kind of corruption in the group. And that was, I think, a shock for themselves. That the Azerbaijan story lasted already much longer, and that is nothing new. And Eduard Lindner from the CSU had started with this, Azerbaijan Forum already in 2010, right after he has left, I think, the Bundestag. We knew all. We all knew.
No, that's the interesting thing. Most of the stories
that
came to German media like this week's to headlines, they were old stories.
Yes.
Like they come 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
I know.
Like, so that was kind of like, I had a feeling maybe it's also, you know, someone is using like Azerbaijan is a convenient Neben topic, like topic that just makes it look even. No,
I think I mean if you went through the people who have taken money, these are completely different. I think somebody from Südthüringen, southern part of Thüringen, is Hauptmann. I mean, he obviously got money, and then there was a advertising in his local newspaper or something like this. So they were from different angles, obviously. Taking influence into this federal policy. But I guess it was more that the CDU-CSU leadership looked very, very closely and much more thoroughly into their own members. That didn't happen before. Because I addressed that problem already a long time ago to the leadership when I still was in the Bundestag, and they simply denied that. They said we do not have a problem. So and I was then surprised. Karin Strenz, who unfortunately died recently.
It's a very familiar approach, by the way, denying the problem.
Yeah, I know. Denying the problem is a very common
politicians love it all over the world.
Attitude. Yeah. Karin Strenz, for example, I knew that there was money in this relationship towards also Kazakhstan, but Azerbaijan. And she never, I mean, had any sanctions from her group. It was in the end her decision not to run for the Bundestag anymore. But before, even in 2014, the CDU knew already about her relationship and about, let's say, her political decision to take money from a foreign state, to make statements in favor of Aliyev after the election, and also to undermine the independent election observers and so on and so forth. But it has had no political sanctions, no political consequences. I think there was a very bad and a very poor behavior from the leadership of the CDU-CSU. So your second question, I think it would be up to Azerbaijan now to prove that they stopped that. I mean, that there is no money flows anymore. There is no attempts from the Azerbaijani side to buy votes from their side to different political groups. I know that there is a change in the leadership also in Azerbaijan, so I hope we won't see this anymore. But I mean, if Azerbaijan can prove they have any, let's say, only clean relations, then there isn't a problem.
But exactly. Don't you think that all this now casts a shadow actually on cooperation in other fields too? And like, what should Azerbaijan do? But it also, I think, from German side, like the question is, why for so long? I mean, criminal activity is criminal activity, right? And Germany is a rule of law. And if someone is involved in criminal activity, you know, why it took so long, you know, in Germany, like actually, and I still think the investigations are ongoing.
No.
So they are not even finished. So legally speaking, you know, from some statements or the behavior, we can, you know, assume certain things, you know. But so how is again, in your view, from Azerbaijan's side, what needs to be done? Like in order, like there is, because Azerbaijan society or, business groups or even parts of government, they may have some legitimate interest, like in EU and Germany. How this work should be done so it doesn't seen as, what have been seen and what has been covered in German media. But on the other hand, I think how in Germany and especially in Green Party or German government, should you think, or media, like distinguish between these kind of legitimate and illegal and criminal activities?
Well, these are, again, different layers. On one hand, the relationship towards Azerbaijan, the bilateral relation of Germany and Azerbaijan was, at least from my perspective, never an easy one. While I think that Azerbaijan really tried to define what is for them important and what is like Western values. And so it was always hard to discuss with them the overall package from our, I mean, what is from our side important to talk about. Independent media, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, opposition in the parliament, and so on and so forth. So there was always a very hard and a very tough regime from the domestic Azerbaijani side, where there was always a big interest when it comes to economical relation. And I think you cannot distinguish this. For me, this is one thing. If I would like to make business with somebody who is inherent corrupt, I don't want this. And I don't want my government to keep this relation ongoing, while I know that most of the ministries are taking bribes and taking money, and that's part of the system. I don't want this. I don't want to spend any investment and state-backed investment from the Hamas guarantees or any other states' funds into this kind of business. Then let's look for a different place where we have less of that criminal structures and state criminal structures. And I don't know whether this is true for each and every Green, but I would say in a majority, of course, we are in favor of set up a clear criteria system when it comes to human rights, when it comes to all kinds of personal freedoms, when it comes to the values of the European Union, which we of course try to implement. And then on the other hand, give also the potential for economical relation and economical activity. But just to focus on economical activities and to say, well, if you want to speak about the other topics, we are out. I think this is also, a critical factor, yes, and it will be difficult.
So this is basically what is being discussed, within Green Party, and this more or less may become the policy, once, if and when Greens will be in the power. In Azerbaijan during the Second Karabakh War, there was a lot of interest, public interest, in what the West, the German, European, American media write about Azerbaijan, Armenia, about what's going on. And it's interesting that nobody really cared or was interested what Indian or Chinese media or Japanese, everyone was watching and was being angry or satisfied, or somehow, everyone was trying to understand how the West looks at this conflict at Armenia, at Azerbaijan. And so in that sense, let me ask you this question. What was the Greens' position on Karabakh conflict before the war, then during the war, and now after the war, and when and if Greens will be in the power? What do you think is Greens' policy towards Armenia, Azerbaijan, and especially about this conflict?
First of all, we regretted that war took place and that it happened and that it caused a lot of casualties on both sides and in the civil sector and in the amongst the civil population. This is the most important issue to raise. We have seen let's say, a lack of progress, for sure, for the last 7 years. There was not enough international pressure to implement what was agreed before. So even I have never defended the Azerbaijani side, I have at least an understanding why it happened. But on the other hand, we saw how much, and that maybe explain a little bit the greenish position, how much involvement, of course, of the Turkish Republic was there from the military side, but also from the training and education military side, and also from the hardware. And there was, of course, I would say, kind of a disappointment that the net revenues which Azerbaijan could achieve through oil and gas selling was mainly invested not in, let's say, human capacity, but a lot in this hardware in the military sector and high technology from Israel and from Turkey. And so reading all about this, for me, I do understand why at one point the Azerbaijani government said, hey, there's no, let's say, political will from the international community to support us in terms of implementing what was agreed, partly agreed, and to make a real progress in terms of giving back at least this the regions around Nagorno-Karabakh and everything what was in the Minsk format debated. But the step to go for a hard and a bloody and a hard war, I think there was almost no understanding and no defense amongst any of the Greens I've spoken to. And of course, it's a very fine line to walk on. While, as I said, it was a failure of all sides and also the international community included. That I can say for sure. But I know that many of my party colleagues have also, let's say, emphasized the negative role of Turkey in that respect and the backing of Turkey, and also maybe the, let's say, empowering Turkey to make this war happening, while Azerbaijan felt then very strong and self-confident to go for this. Russia's role is a very, let's say, disputable, as Russia's role in the a direct neighborhood is always critical and it's always difficult to assess. And in the end, Putin is the winner of all. I mean, he has now boots on the ground in all of the 6 Eastern Partnership countries. I don't know how much it is being seen as a victory that Russia deals actually with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict.
You mean in Azerbaijan?
Yeah, whether this is seen as a better solution now with Russia alone being the negotiator instead of having the Minsk format. This would be also interesting to hear. But in general, I think, at least from my perspective, from the European perspective, I feel that we were completely absent. I think there was no shuttle diplomacy, there was no engagement from the European side, there was no special envoy, there was no active taking up, active trying to influence, to stop it earlier and to at least play a part in the entire ceasefire, in the aftermath of the ceasefire. So the European Union didn't play a role at all. And I think that was really, really a missed opportunity. I mean, not to stop the war at the beginning, not to have a saying during the war, and not to play any role in the, let's say, first negotiation. I think that was absolutely, it's a geopolitical disaster.
I will not tell you anything new if I tell you, like, from Azerbaijan perspective, it of course looks very different because it looks very natural that Azerbaijani army was trained, by Turkish army, because we had to deal with Armenian army that was trained, for 3 decades by Russian army. So that was the conundrum. I think Armenia, Azerbaijan is in, like, Armenia was backed by Russia until the moment it was not backed, and then Azerbaijan, which was not backed by Turkey during the first Karabakh war. During the first Karabakh war, there was a situation where the then democratic elected president Elçi asked Süleyman Demirel, back then Prime Minister of Turkey, just several helicopters to save refugees who were leaving Kelbajar, so they are not being killed, and Turkey didn't give helicopters. So the geopolitics was very different, and now geopolitics changed. And from Azerbaijan perspective, of course, it's clear victory. There are, of course, people, some people in Azerbaijan, I would say, mostly opposition, who think that, are very unhappy, and I think everyone is unhappy about the Russian presence there. But I do think that, and I think many people think that to 90%, the problem has been solved. Like all these occupied territories have been liberated. and if you go to these territories, look at these cities, they're like Agdam, physically, like there is not, not even mosque or church, like there is no building left, untouched. Like there is, nothing there. And I think that was the realistic compromise that was achieved, that because Russia did intervene at the end. They did stop Azerbaijan from going further. But at the moment, I think we are in a situation where we cannot say that peace has been achieved. This is not sustainable peace. This is temporary situation. And geopolitics changed in our region, So I think that's what would be interesting for me to hear from you. Like now, what was in the past, it's in the past. But now, considering this new situation, for 30 years there was talk about necessity of opening the border between Turkey and Armenia, about opening communication, making the first steps for, integrating, Armenia, Azerbaijan together, regional integration. That was not happening. But now it is actually happening. It is, transportation links are open, so we see that in a way, Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and even Armenia, I think in a way, even if it's, I think internally, politically, it's more difficult to acknowledge it or to do something in that direction with great enthusiasm. But I think this ice is broken. Like there is, it could go either way. We could see that, again, entrenched positions and movement towards another war in 10 years or 20 years. Or we could see a different developments which could lead Armenia and Azerbaijan finally to finding a solution and to integration. In that sense, I want again to come to your party and potentially how do you think here the German policy and EU policy should be or will be, if later this year, with Greens probably in coalition in Germany, how this policy should be towards what could EU and Germany do, in your opinion, to help finally Armenia and Azerbaijan to find, at least to move towards peace and integration, rather than to take the other more known path?
Well, let me start from my, let's say, very personal observation. If this was perceived as a victory for Azerbaijan, unfortunately, I don't speak your language, but what I've heard and what was transferred as let's say, messages was that the rhetoric of President Aliyev was really humiliating against Armenia. And so if anybody would be interested in this integration and in a sustainable peace and in a permanent ceasefire, I think it would be good if Azerbaijan, as the winner, as the one who has the victory, would start with a process of reconciliation which is visible, which is acknowledgeable, which is, a visible signal towards the neighbor, and instead of humiliating. And that was clearly missing. So that's not up to Germany to do this. This would be up to the, let's so-called, winner of this terrible war. And nobody has seen that. And second of all, I think Germany could play a role of facilitating a dialogue. But for that, I guess it must have been, or it should be clear from both sides that they are ready to commit themselves to anything like this. We see a huge domestic fight now in Armenia. Unfortunately, we will have new elections. We do not know what the outcome might be. It's a very tragic. People are sick and tired and absolutely exhausted. So I think we have a big responsibility for taking care that Armenia will be economically recovering as fast as possible, so they can play a role in this and they can be a partner on the same level. And maybe giving you some more insights when it comes to, I mean, the format of Eastern Partnership is already now, I think, in place for almost 12 or even more, I think 2007, so 14 years. And so from my observation and from what my colleagues in the European Parliament have told me, it was mainly easy with 5 countries, and it was always difficult with 1 country. So if Azerbaijan is interested in any kind of economical integration, it would be good if we could work at least in a format where everyone agrees to cooperate with the European Union, and also Azerbaijan would be on the same level and not just saying, I don't care about you. And that's mainly the problem. I have heard that from different perspectives, from different institutions. That I have now spoken to somebody who works in a South Caucasus nature conservation nature fund. This was founded by the German government with the KfW and other agencies, and it should covering Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. And it's almost impossible because there's no interest at all from the Azerbaijani side. And this goes along at least with many other examples. So Azerbaijan thinks they are kind of superior. They want to be excluded of this more, let's say, general criteria, and they just go for the hard business cooperation. And I don't think this will work. So if you decide you want to cooperate with the European Union, you want to cooperate and you have an interest in Germany, then it's not just possible to have this selective approach of this relationship. And so far I have not seen this as being acknowledged by the Azerbaijani side, but maybe I'm also misled because I have no direct contact. I mean, you're a very interesting person, but maybe it would be up to me also to go to Azerbaijan after the pandemic and really talk to people and get a better overview. So I might be biased at that moment, but nevertheless, what I've heard from my colleagues was not so promising, let's put it that way.
Let me ask you this question, because you are saying that, I know that you have been very active in democracy and human rights field when it comes to all Eastern Partnership countries and Russia as well. Do you think that this, and in connection what you were just saying today also during this interview, that there should be some principles of which are very much core of it is democracy, human rights. And do you think that this promotion, democracy promotion, human rights promotion, and applying the same standards to all these countries, do you think it really has worked during last, 10, 15 years? Do you think that, didn't you have a feeling that this approach, while working in some countries and helping them to develop and to progress, in the case of other countries, not just doesn't help, but actually creates backlash, and situation is much worse than when it was, 5 years, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago? I mean, do you challenge your own kind of or European philosophy and approach in this special Eurasian region?
Nobody has to take the money from Europe. I don't mind. I'm happy when we get more money for other countries where they are ready for democratic development. I mean, I don't mind.
But it's not about money. It's about developing relationships.
Yeah, but I mean, what is the basis for a relationship? I mean, if a country is more or less on paper committed to the values, but then in reality they are not, because they refuse to accept and to implement everything which they were signing on.
Some obviously are not. We have understood it, I think, in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm fine. Then they might go for the Russian way or the Turkish way. I mean, then that's the way. The problem is that some parts of the European Union still think that's okay, that's sexy and cool to get some oil and gas from Azerbaijan. I do understand. That's a dilemma. So you have some resources.
Or from
which-
Russia, or you have
Yeah,
to
I mean,
deal.
you have to
deal. You said in your own
diversify.
party,
Yeah, yeah.
you had
Yeah,
the politicians who say, okay, we understand these beautiful values, but then there is a reality, and we have to deal with these countries, with these
Yeah.
governments.
But I mean, if you want to develop a region and you think that political prisoners is not a good idea, I think you should try to use your leverage. And we have a leverage because, I mean, where do most of the Azerbaijani students go to study? That's not in Baku. Many of them like to go to universities in Europe, and they like to be trained and educated, and even sometimes stay in those countries. So it's not that they stay in Russia, it's not that they stay in China, it's mainly that they have this kind of soft power and they like it. So it's the attractiveness of our system is there. And for me, the question is if they would like to cooperate in the long term or in the future, why should we give up on our values?
No, but this was very good example. For example, education, right? I mean, you have to deal sometimes with governments who are, let's put it mildly, like with democracy and human rights are not the priority, but once you block or make more difficult the relationship with them, then other areas like education could also suffer. And there are many, education is just one field, right? There are many other groups in those societies, maybe even within the governments, but also largely at societies, which are, they will suffer, they will suffer more than those several people in power when relationships are broken and when we are going more back towards, what we had during Soviet Union, and that is, I think...
But the decision is not made by us. If the country goes back to the Soviet Union style, I mean, how can we influence that? Giving them even more money, try to interact with them and put more investment into the country, while we do not see, let's say, a political step forward, a political progress? I wouldn't say so.
Let's talk about democracy and human rights promotion and support for civil society. There have been a lot of articles, papers written about it, because you can do it in two different ways, or you can combine both of them. And I think in some countries all of it works, but in others some policies can create backlash and it may not work. For example, if you talk about support of civil society, there are certain type of support which these governments, authoritarian governments, they perceive it as existential threat. So whenever they see this, they are acting very differently, aggressively to stop this. But on the other hand, there may be areas where you have civil society support, and this is not perceived by the government as existential threat. And in that sense, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't change the government or that society or that state. It does, but it does more so, not so short term, but more mid-term, long term. So there is, and saying that EU, it's not up to EU decide or not up to German government decide, I agree and disagree, because yes, first of all, it is, of course, these countries, these authoritarian governments decide what kind of interaction they want with Europe or with Germany. But on the other hand, when depending on Europe's policy or German's policy, it defines also the level of relationship. Something, some governments, they block, they come up with entire legislation and stop allowing anything, which is similar to civil society activity. Others are more selective. They ban certain areas of work, but then they are okay and more tolerant with others. So there is this kind of sophistication in when we talk about politics between Europe and these kind of countries. And for me, it's just interesting because you had so much experience. Like, you have been in this for 10, 15 years. And I know you had countries and places where you were very happy to see the impact, of the struggle of those civil societies. But there were definitely some countries where you haven't just seen the progress, but you have seen that things got worse and worse. So, and I was just interested in your reflection, like considering all this baggage you have, you're coming with, and then now this, basically what we're seeing, the more, the stronger green movement all over Europe and here in Germany. And coming back again to this question, so do you think this kind of complex reality, will it be reflected in the future government, in the future green approach, or you think nothing will change and it will be just even, like what will be the green policy? And I'm sorry to ask it again, but I just wanted to see if you had some reflections based on your experience for last 10, 15 years that you had in this sphere.
Well, one major argument given by President Aliyev was always that he has to be so strict and so restrictive with his own society because of the Nagorno-Karabakh territorial conflict. So this could be eased now, since he has already had this war, since he has erobert,
liberated, or I don't know what's the language.
Partly that region back, and this is perceived as a victory for Azerbaijan.
And for him personally as well. So he's more self-confident politically.
Yes, and this could be translated now into a more, let's say, tolerant, open societal approach. That would be my logic. While, I mean, when I was in Azerbaijan before, I was always confronted with the situation that no, we cannot do anything because of the conflict. Well, now the conflict, he went for a unilateral approach, and he went for, let's say, quite a risky approach, but at least partly won, if we would like to call it. And now, I mean, he could translate it into this, let's say, domestic easing.
So there is expectations that he would upgrade political system.
Yes. And then also to include into this political system the other issues I have mentioned before. But when it comes to the green agenda, and when it comes to, let's say, a more human rights, democracy-based approach, I don't think whether it needs a different approach. I don't think that we really have to be especially creative to attract any of these autocracies. I mean, there is an offer, and the offer is still there. We would like to cooperate with many of those countries much more, but not to any price. And I remember being in Azerbaijan the last time, I think it was in 2012 or 13, that even the German chamber, the business chamber at that time, it was just founded, and I think it took them 6 years, and they said it's mainly because of the bribes, because it is so difficult to make finally at least an institution where the Azerbaijani business community will benefit from. So 6 years to pay all the bribes, to get everything done, to get everything paperwork. And that has nothing to do with a green foreign policy. It is simply has to do with how Azerbaijani and the ministries and the institutions would like to make money and business with a foreign country such as Germany. And if you make it so difficult, not you personally, but if your government makes it so difficult, there's no wonder that there's a big reluctance on the, let's say, investor side to come to this country. Nevertheless, I think there is still a big interest. Yeah, but if you could be less bureaucratic, if this country would open up, if this country has a different mindset on things and less control and less tempted to be, I mean, to take bribes on different levels, it would be much easier. And I guess there would be also a bigger interest then from smaller and medium companies or enterprises.
We have seen actually there was this Asan system, which is the system where citizens get their papers from government, your passport or documents or get other services. It's been built exactly when you say since 2010, 11, 12, so it has been built all over Azerbaijan. So a lot of petty corruption has been dealt with, which for me shows that actually, it is possible. So Azerbaijan can deal with corruption when it wants, or in areas where it wants. So I fully agree with you that this the end of the Second Karabakh War, the fact that Aliyev has been seen in Azerbaijan, but also I think internationally, as a winner of this war, or one of the winners if you want, then it does actually, it can give him more self-confidence to do more reforms and change within the country, in corruption area, but also in area of upgrading political system, giving more rights and freedoms. And but I also believe that, because you said this is not up to us, it's true, it is of course up to Azerbaijani people and government to decide what kind of system do we want to have, what we want to fight for, what we don't want to fight for, and what's the strategy for us to changing and reforming this. But at the same time, I do think that, as I told you, during the war, Azerbaijanis didn't care what Iranian or Chinese or Indian media was writing or politicians were telling about Azerbaijan and Armenia, but they were really, really alert about what was written and told about Azerbaijan in the Western world. So in a way, Azerbaijan is part of Western world, in their where they want to see it, themselves, where we want to see it. And it's not just Aliyev, but who was giving everyday interviews mostly to Western media. He wasn't giving, to other media. So, and I think that the Western policy and German's policy can affect the way or maybe the speed with which Azerbaijan will or will not develop. And I think that it will be very excited to see, when Greens have more say in German foreign policy and in European foreign policy, how it will play out, and how, will you be able to engage, like governments like Aliyev's government, and I know you had a lot of disappointments, in the past, like with Russia, like an American policy with Russia. Every time you want to renew something, but it doesn't always work. But in history, there were moments where it worked, and I would like to stay positive and expect that you will see the complexity, not just Azerbaijan, but I think all these post-Soviet countries, which they are very different. Azerbaijan is not like Georgia or Ukraine. I think by now we have seen it and understood it. So thank you very much, Viola. It was very interesting to have you, and I wish you successful elections for your party in Germany this year.
Thanks a lot, Emin. I will be a pleasure at one point to travel to the region and really speak a little bit more behind the scenes, behind the closed doors, and get some first-hand information on the potential changes and also the adaptation of the new situation. And I'm more than happy and glad to contribute in any kind of, let's say, better cooperation with Azerbaijan on the European, but also, of course, on the German level. So thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Thank you, Viola. Thank you.